Earlier this year, my wife and I took a 3-week vacation to Indonesia, visiting Bali, Lombok, Labuan Bajo, and going on a 3-day boat cruise to see the Komodo National Park. Indonesia has the perfect honeymoon mixture of culture, adventure, relaxation, luxury, and romance. And in this video, I'm going to show you exactly how much our 3-week honeymoon cost, because while there's tons of incredible travel vlogs from Indonesia, you don't often get to see a full breakdown of how much it would cost you to do the same. And luckily for you, I'm a nerd and I kept a spreadsheet, so it makes it easy to break everything down into these 3 categories: transportation, accommodation, and food/activities. And although we're from Canada and the currency in Indonesia is the rupiah, I'm going to convert all of the figures in this video into US dollars for easier comparison. So let's start with transportation. 2 round-trip flights from Toronto to Bali connecting through Taipei cost us $2,582.76. Now, obviously that's a pretty expensive part of the trip, but it can't be avoided. Especially for us coming from the other side of the world, those flights cost a lot more. Now, once you've reached Indonesia, unless you're planning on staying on one island like Bali for the entirety of your trip, then you're probably also going to have to budget for some local flights, because honestly, it's just not practical to take a boat from island to island. It takes too long, and if you're only going for something like a 3-week vacation, you don't want to spend 5 of those days on boats going back and forth to different islands, especially not when a flight to those islands only takes 30 minutes or an hour and costs, less than $100. So this was our breakdown of the local flights that we took. We started in Bali, but next we flew to Lombok, and that flight cost $147.35 for 2 people. After that, we went from Lombok back to Bali and then flew over to Labuan Bajo for $315, and that included both legs of the flight. Finally, when we were done in Labuan Bajo, we flew back to Bali for $207.56. So those 4 local flights allowed us to visit 3 of Indonesia's larger islands, each of which is completely different and has entirely different things to offer. And we also got to experience an overnight cruise in the Komodo Island National Park, which I'll talk about later. But the total for all of those local flights was only $670.80 for 2 people, which, when you factor in the time savings, was definitely worth it. So if we add up all of the flights, that's a total of $3,253.56. Next up, accommodations. Now, I'm not going to talk about every single place we stayed, but there's definitely a few highlights. When we first arrived in Bali, we decided to stay in a place called Canggu, which is popular for tourists, but also for digital nomads. The spot we stayed was a boutique hotel called the Papaya Guest House, and honestly, it wasn't super fancy, but it had everything we needed and was really nice. It wasn't too expensive. For $250, we got 5 nights in a beautiful room overlooking the courtyard and the pool. Oh, and also breakfast was included. And this is one of the great things about most hotels in Indonesia, is that breakfast is pretty much always included, so that's one less meal that you have to worry about spending money on. Now, the next place that we stayed was definitely a major step up in terms of quality and luxury though, because we decided to spend a week at a resort in the southern part of Lombok, which is the island right next to Bali. So this place was called the Sagara Lombok Beach Resort, and honestly, it was spectacular. We got an entire little luxury cabin to ourselves with a private garden in the back that had an outdoor shower. And the cabin overlooked this lush green courtyard with the infinity pool and the beach and the Indian Ocean in the distance. This place is definitely what you think of when you think honeymoon. The hospitality was incredible. They had a restaurant in the resort. Everything was delicious. And honestly, I can't say enough good things about the place. I would 100% go back if I had the chance. Now, this place was definitely a little bit more expensive. A 1-week stay here cost us $832.60. A final highlight was when we came back to Bali after doing the Komodo National Park cruise and stayed in Ubud. Here we changed things up a bit and stayed in a hotel that had rice fields in the middle and all around, and we stayed in a beautiful room overlooking lush gardens and greenery. It really had a serene and peaceful vibe to it. And this place was also not too expensive. For 4 nights, it cost us $223. Now, in total on accommodations, when you add up the other nights that we spent in Labuan Bajo, as well as a couple nights on the beach in Sanur, we spent $1,592.25. And that is for 23 nights in Indonesia, in Bali, from Canggu to Ubud to Sanur, and then also in the southern part of Lombok, as well as Labuan Bajo. Some of the places we stayed were luxurious and romantic, and others were just simple accommodations where we could rest after going on adventures. Now, if you're currently budgeting for a similar trip, you could easily spend 5x the budget if you want to stay only at the most luxurious 5-star places. We avoided those because we wanted to go a little bit off the beaten track, and also because we didn't really see the value in spending thousands of dollars extra when you can easily get super nice accommodations for very reasonable prices. On the other hand, if you wanted to travel super frugally, you could slash this accommodation budget in half. Now, being our honeymoon, of course, we wanted to stay in some nicer places, and I think we struck a pretty good balance, but obviously, you do you. Finally, let's talk about food and activities. Again, I'm not gonna touch on every single thing we did or ate. I'm just gonna give you the highlights with prices, and then I'll add it all up for the total. So starting in Canggu, we were just getting our feet wet and experiencing Bali culture. After spending 30+ hours in airplanes and airports, we chilled by the pool for a little bit, which obviously was free. We walked around for the first day, went to the beach in Canggu, which honestly isn't that nice unless you're really into surfing, but we did find tons of amazing restaurants in that area since there's so many digital nomads. Now, an easy way to get around within Canggu, or really anywhere on Bali, is to use the Gojek app, which is what you can use to call these little bikes. They're super cheap, they cost a few dollars per ride, and you pay in cash after the ride is over, and these guys will take you anywhere you want to go. The main activities we did while staying in Canggu were we went to the Uluwatu temple, which is on the southern tip of the island. It's a beautiful complex, and then at nighttime they have something called a Kecak fire and dance show, which is an amazing cultural experience where the performers chant in a really rhythmic way and they tell an epic love story. The big thing we did while staying in Canggu though was we took a private day trip with a private driver for about $65 and he drove us all around the island. So we went to the Tanah Lot temple first. It was pouring rain in the morning and it was completely miserable. So we didn't really get the full Tanah Lot experience, but it was still really nice to see. Then we went to a monkey temple and we saw monkeys and fed them peanuts. After that, we drove up into the mountains and visited the Jatiluwi, I'm probably butchering the name, but these UNESCO World Heritage rice terraces, which are absolutely incredible to see. And then we went even higher up into the mountains and visited the Ulan Danu floating temple, which is this beautiful temple built on a lake, and they have this one multi-tiered pyramid or tower that is actually floating in the middle of the lake. I highly recommend visiting it. And yeah, that entire day trip with all of those different stops was only $65 for 2 people with a private driver the whole way. And he was great. This is actually one of the best things about Bali, well, about Indonesia in general, is that the drivers are usually very knowledgeable. And so we learned tons about the history of Bali and the culture and the Bali version of Hinduism just from speaking to our drivers. Okay, next up was Lombok. And here at the Sagara Resort, which was super romantic and beautiful, we spent a lot of time just hanging out by the pool or by the beach, going for swims in the ocean or going for walks on the beach. It was really more of a relaxing honeymoon vibe. And we did take surf lessons nearby for around $15 per person, which was super fun. We got massages, we ate, we drank, and we just hung out and had a good time. Now, the one other activity we did while staying here was we did do a day trip with a private driver and then in a private boat to a couple of islands where we did a bunch of snorkeling. And that snorkeling trip cost us around $40 per person, so super reasonable. All right, the next activity highlight though was the boat cruise through the Komodo National Park. And for us, this was definitely the #1 highlight of the entire trip. It was absolutely incredible. Now this was a 3-day, 2-night trip on a medium-sized boat with 5 cabins, and it cost $1,370, but it was absolutely worth it. For starters, the boat was awesome. It was made of wood and had a real nice luxury vibe / feel to it. The other guests that were on the boat with us were awesome people and we got along great with them. We spent a lot of time hanging out on the deck of the boat, sipping cocktails and watching the beautiful scenery roll by. And honestly, this part of Indonesia is just absolutely stunning. The islands we went to, like Rinca and Padar, where we hiked up early in the morning to see the sunrise over the ocean and the mountainous islands in the distance, absolutely incredible. That's an experience I will never forget. We saw turquoise water and white sand beaches. We visited a pink beach where the corals mixed with the sand and makes everything look pink. And the wildlife was amazing. We got to see giant bats flying overhead. We saw, of course, the Komodo dragons. And these creatures are really spectacular to see up close. Of course, they're super dangerous, so you don't want to get too close. But we walked around the island and I think we saw 4 or 5 of these Komodo dragons. And then the ocean wildlife. The place is just teeming with it. There's dolphins and sea turtles and manta rays. We saw tons of different fish while snorkeling, and every place that we went, we pulled out the snorkels and the masks and we went swimming. This boat cruise and this location is honestly like living in a dream. It's just so spectacular, it's surreal, it's hard to actually believe what you're seeing. Now, where else did we go? Well, we spent a couple of days in Labuan Bajo, but honestly, this place was more of a stopover for us to get to the boat cruise. Although we did visit an interesting network of caves, which was cool. Oh, and while we were in Labuan Bajo, the president of Indonesia was there and he walked right past us, along with his security guards and a massive crowd of people that were clamoring for attention. So that was interesting to see. But the other highlight I would say for me was Ubud. And this is more of the cultural hub of Bali. So after Labuan Bajo, we went back to Bali and we stayed in Ubud. And this is where you have the rice fields, but you also have museums, which are amazing. We went to see a couple of different temples and museums and art museums, and that was an interesting experience. There's also waterfalls in the area, but honestly, low-key, one of my favorite things about Ubud, or really you can get this anywhere in Bali, are the massages slash foot massages. You'll find these places all over Bali, and for a couple of dollars, like $3 to $5, you can go in and you can get a 30-minute massage or a 30-minute foot massage, and this is absolutely worth it. In the latter half of the trip, I honestly found myself going nearly every day because honestly, for that price, why not? We finished off our trip with a couple of relaxing days just on the beach in Sanur, which is definitely nice, but not so spectacular as the other things that we'd already seen. It's chill though. You can go to the beach and you can rent an umbrella and a bed for like $5 per day. Now, as for the food, that was absolutely amazing. I've neglected it a little bit in this video, but largely because I'm not a food vlogger and I don't have tons of footage of what we ate, although I can say that there was a lot of rice dishes and noodle dishes, but also there's a lot of upscale restaurants and you can get pretty much every different type of cuisine you can imagine, some of which is really like world class. Obviously, we ate a ton of seafood, which is fresh and incredible, although I will say both of us did get sick at one point or another on this trip from the food that we ate, and we had to take lots of antibiotics and other sorts of pills to solve that issue. So something to be aware of. Bali belly is a real thing. In total though, on food and activities, we spent $3,648. Again, if you're budgeting for a similar trip, you can easily spend twice that or half that, depending on the level of luxury and comfort that you're going for. So for example, with the boat cruise we did to the Komodo National Park, you can do a version of that where instead of getting a private cabin on a luxury boat, you sleep on a mat on the floor just underneath a thin roof on a boat with like 20 other people. And for that, you can spend less than $100 instead of more than $1,000. But that's not really the honeymoon vibe. Same thing with food. We went to a lot of nicer restaurants because we wanted to eat well. But if you really wanted to, you could go to these little local restaurants called warongs, spend a couple of dollars per meal, and easily have a budget of just a couple of $100 for a multi-week trip for food. Anyways, when you add up all of our expenses together, this is what you get. For transportation, $3,253. For accommodation, $1,592. And for food and activities, $3,648. And so the grand total for this 3-week honeymoon in Indonesia was $8,494. Per person though, that's only $4,247. Now, would I recommend Indonesia, or specifically Bali, Lombok, and Labuan Bajo to anybody? The answer is absolutely, hands down, yes. It was the trip of a lifetime, and honestly, it's a perfect honeymoon spot because it has everything that you might possibly want, regardless of what you're interested in. It has history, it has culture, it has food, but it also has nature, it has nightlife and clubbing if you're into that, and it has plenty of adventure. Indonesia has something to offer anyone, and if you ever get a chance to visit, I highly, highly recommend it. And if you enjoyed this video, you might also like this one. Thanks for watching and have a great day.